Hello and welcome to Rewildology, the nature podcast that explores the human side of conservation, travel, and rewilding the planet. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, conservation biologist and adventure traveler. Today is the final episode of the show's Wildest Hits series. Today, I'm taking you all the way back to episode 18, so please give me a little bit of grace. I was such a newbie back then. For this episode, I sat down with Sheridan Samano, a super inspirational woman that has overcome many hurdles to see her vision come to life. As a quick aside, Sheridan's conservation tourism business, Reefs to Rockies, is now thriving post-COVID, and she and my company, The Wild Source, are partnering on lots of exciting trips. Stay posted on those in case you'd like to join. The odds are pretty high. I'll probably be guiding a few of those here and there. Anyways, let's get to today's show. Please enjoy Volume 5 of Rewildology's Wildest Hits with Sheridan.
I have a question. How did this past year turn out for you? Was it full of struggle? Maybe even heartbreak? What did you do with your circumstances? Did you make lemonade out of lemons? Or are you still trying to find the beauty and opportunity in this global shutdown? No matter how this past year turned out for you, you're going to relate to this week's guest, Sheridan Samano. Sheridan is the co-founder and owner of Reefs to Rockies, a boutique travel company that specializes in creating the best nature and wildlife itineraries. Her goal is to give her clients the greatest nature experiences of their life while having as little impact on the environment as possible. I know that you all are well aware that COVID completely crashed the tourism industry, and we explore what it was like for her to almost lose her business. Sheridan is the perfect example of embracing the suck, as Brené Brown would say, and creating something beautiful out of her new situation. Sheridan is an avid birder, and in her newfound downtime, she wrote a book called Best Birding Hikes, Colorado Front Range, and continued to grow her popular meetup group, Birding and Beers. Sheridan drops life bombs throughout the whole conversation, and I'm sure she'll impact you just as much as she impacted me. We met at her favorite birding spot outside of Boulder, Colorado to record this episode. So you'll hear some lively birds chirping in the background, even a few airplanes flying overhead. If you're liking the show, please be sure to subscribe so that you can be notified when a new episode drops. I'd really love to hear what you think by leaving a review on wherever you're listening or commenting on Rewildology's YouTube channel. I'm also very active on the socials, and you can DM me on Instagram or LinkedIn at Rewildology or email at hello@rewildology.com. And now, on to my conversation with Sheridan.
Sweet God, this is such a great place.
Yeah, it's a nice spot, isn't it?
I'm so glad you brought the
train. Gets me out of the office.
Yeah, it's like, I gotta do a podcast interview.
Yeah, exactly.
Sweet. Well, I think a great place to start would just be who are you and what do you do? And then we'll dive deep into everything else.
Yeah, so do you want to start back at the very beginning?
Let's go all the way back.
Let's
go all the way back. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? Who's Sheridan?
Wow, yeah, that's a complex topic, and I think it changes daily, right? So actually, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and it's interesting now where, like, just even driving up today, getting into this spot, I feel most at peace when I'm outdoors and in kind of wild spaces. And we just said wild spaces can be very close to neighborhoods or urbanization. But I didn't really have too much of that as a kid. I remember I've always had just an absolute fascination with wildlife and nature. I think back to, I can remember the first time I thought about what I wanted to be when I grew up, as a little kid. And the first thing, I wrote a book about it. We had to write a book. And it was in fourth grade, I wrote a book about this. It was set in a zoo. And the hero of the story was a zookeeper. And I remember that, I really wanted to be a zookeeper. It was like the first job I remember really wanting. And mainly because I thought that was going to get me close to animals, and I remember flipping through National Geographic. My grandfather on my mom's side, my mom's dad, he lived a couple of hours away in East Texas, and He had a house on 7 acres, which isn't huge, but as a kid seems huge. So he had the house and then a couple of stock ponds behind it that, you had to walk a ways, and we'd go fishing out there. And he was a nature lover. He was a big fly fisherman. He always had National Geographic. So I think a lot of us that are drawn to wildlife, whether it's wildlife tourism or just wildlife in general, you remember National Geographic was the iconic magazine. And so, thinking, well, if I become a zookeeper, I can work with these animals. And I don't, as a kid, you don't really quite remember, but he got remarried. And I remember being at lunch with his wife and saying something about wanting to work with animals. She's like, well, you could be a veterinarian.
Ooh.
And at that time, and so this was maybe 5th, 6th grade. I think it was probably 6th grade. The conversation came up. It was like Texas A&M University was the only vet school in Texas at the time. Now Texas Tech has a vet school as well. But from that point on, 6th grade, I was going to go to Texas A&M and I was going to be a veterinarian because that was going to get me into not wild animal vet. I didn't foresee being working at a zoo and being a vet, but being a small animal vet. And so that was the track. That was what I was going to do. And so I go to A&M and I did a little internship thing or whatever where you can go and visit, things. And we went to a vet and I saw blood for the first time and almost passed out. And I saw another thing that happened was there was this cat that had, you're young kids, you're like high school age, it's a little blurry. I think it had to have been my senior year in high school before, but I had already been accepted to A&M, so that's where I was planning to go. And there was a cat, and it's not a great story, but it really, I think, kind of invoked this from then on, this real passion for being an advocate for animals in whatever way that came about. Because there was a cat that, they brought us in, these young kids, and there's a cat laying on this table that's paralyzed. And the cat, they're trying to kind of assess, what do you think happened, And what the long story short, a neighbor kid, it was an elderly woman's cat. She came home, it was in her front yard, not moving, and paralyzed because a neighbor kid shot it with a BB gun. Yeah, and they had to euthanize it. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I can do that. You see it, right? I've been on safari and seen, a cheetah take out, a gazelle and understand that that's a very different thing. But those sorts of things, the blood, all these things come together. And so, yeah, I still want to work with animals, but I'm not quite sure that it's going to be vet school. So luckily, Texas A&M had a wildlife and fisheries program. So if you fast forward a little bit, I changed majors after my freshman year. I changed from the pre-vet track my sophomore year to wildlife and fisheries because I figured I can still work with animals, but I'll do it from behind binoculars or, from that kind of a different standpoint where I'm not, in the veterinary aspect. And from then I was hooked. My first majors class was ornithology. So, the study of birds. And, we had to do, and it was just by chance. It could have been mammalogy. It could have been, whatever. Herpetology, So here it's ornithology. We're having to take these field trips with the TA who's teaching the lab. And it was a Saturday field trip to a reservoir outside of College Station. And we pull up on this bridge and there's it was in the winter. So all the trees had lost their leaves and there was a bald eagle sitting up in a tree. And I don't know, I probably had seen a bald eagle prior to that, but I certainly never really registered it. And it was sitting up in this tree and it flew out of the tree. And when it opened its wingspan, my mouth just dropped.
See how big it actually.
I was like, I couldn't believe it was that big. And it was really the spark, and then, in that same class, we were walking one day. It was another field day. We're walking along this kind of rural road, and it's a barbed wire fence. And the TA's like, "You guys notice anything on this fence?" And you start looking closely, and you're seeing things like grasshoppers on the barbed wire
that you wouldn't have noticed before.
Would have never noticed before. And so the story goes in. There's this bird called the loggerhead shrike that impales its prey. It's called the butcher bird, It's this little masked bandit that takes its prey and sticks it on a thorn or on a barbed wire fence and comes back and gets it later. And I was just like, are you kidding me?
A bird does
A bird does? I mean, how badass is that?
Yeah.
Like, and so, it was like a couple of more things and I was done. I was like,
Birds are it.
Birds are it. I took a field studies course soon thereafter in Mexico, and a good friend of mine who was also in the program with me, we came back from that. I ended up having to lead bird walks because I was the only student who had taken ornithology. And we were doing mist netting for bats. And we both came back from that trip. And I said, I'm going to study birds. And she came back. She's like, I'm going to study bats. And that's ultimately kind of set the path. And so, it took a few years. I graduated. I did field work with an emphasis on birds, worked in a variety of places. And then I came out my senior year of college in spring break. So it was in March of 95. A friend of mine and I came to visit another friend who had just moved out to Boulder. And we drove out and it took 2 days. We coming up 36, I remember pulling on at the overlook there, right as you're coming into Boulder, and seeing the Flatirons for the first time and like love at first sight, like wholeheartedly. And I remember saying, I'm going to live here someday. And especially after that week of being here. And a year and a half later, I was here. And I didn't quite know what it was going to do, but I was lucky to I was looking at grad schools. I thought for sure I was going to PhD track and teach at a university. And I ended up finding I wanted to have a female graduate advisor. It was a big deal. It was in Texas. It was a fantastic program, but it was very male dominated. It was very much, the track was feeding into fish and game management, which I had no desire to do. And so I was lucky enough to find out about a professor at the University of Colorado, Denver, Diana Tombach. I don't even remember how, this is kind of like right at the internet sort of stuff. I don't remember how I found out about her, but I reached out to her and eventually got into grad school. Wow. And I was able to stay. I did field work. I studied Clark's nutcrackers, which is a super cool high altitude bird here. It exhibits this really interesting obligate mutualism with the pine trees it lives in. So it literally replants the forest for these trees. And so, I graduated, was like most grad students, decided I need to take a break between field work and maybe I'll go back for my PhD. But I got a job at the Community College of Aurora teaching. I had a mammalogy professor later at A&M. This guy, he studied bats. And, you tell stories a lot, right? Certain stories, every time you meet somebody, that story comes up. Or if you're a teacher, you're telling these same kind of tidbits each time you teach a class when you get to a certain point. And this professor, when he would talk about bats, you knew he had told these stories 100 times. And it was this childlike enthusiasm. Like every time he told, you could just see it in him. And I remember thinking, if you can if you can find something as a teacher, if you can invoke that enthusiasm and kind of, get just even one student every year really captivated by it, you're golden, And so I knew I wanted to teach. And so I was able to get a teaching job. I started teaching part-time at the Community College of Denver and Community College of Aurora, because you're able to teach with a master's degree in the major. You don't have to have a PhD. And I thought it'd be a year or two. I'll go teach and, come back and finish my PhD and then, track into teaching at a 4-year university. But I got in the classroom and I loved it. I mean, I just loved the student body, really diverse, very diverse student population at both community college versus where I had gone to school, which I loved. I loved the dynamic, the conversations. And I don't remember if it was a year or two after doing part-time teaching at both, a full-time position at the Community College of Aurora came up. And so I was able to get hired there. So I actually taught there for 11 years. But in the midst of that, because I had done a field studies course as an undergrad and I had done a field studies course as a grad student, and I always say I'm a somewhat high-functioning introvert. I wasn't a student that went and knew to go meet professors. Neither of my parents had gone to college, so I was first generation. I didn't have that kind of networking skills that I think if you kind of come up through that, and so really felt like I had missed out on being able to just kind of develop a relationship with a professor for letters of recommendation, all these things that become a big deal, later on. And I felt that the community college students were going to miss that too, because if they spend 2 years, their first 2 years at a community college, they go to a 4-year school, they've lost the 2 years already, right? So it takes a little while. So I wanted to develop a field studies program that we didn't have. Most of our students were tracking pre-health, so we had a lot of pre-nursing, a lot of pre-pharmacy students, so they were going to go into the health stuff, but we had a handful that were thinking wildlife. They were thinking, see it, Colorado State University or something like that. So to get tenure, you had to come up with a project. And so I approached my department chair and said, I had gone to Costa Rica for the first time and came back from that and said, I want to do a study abroad program here. So came back and talked to my department chair and said, what do you think about me developing a study abroad program for students here? And I said, and in Costa Rica, where it's not as tough a sell as some places. It's a little more accessible. A lot of these students had very, low, financial means, et cetera. But that's what happened is I started a study abroad program. Wow. That focused on sea turtle conservation there. I was lucky enough to meet some really fantastic partners there. And eventually that became Reefs to Rockies. I started traveling with the students, and very quickly, when you're taking 20 undergrad students, you learn very quickly what works well, what does, it's very, very quickly you figure things out. And so, a few years later, I had 4 months off. It was a great job, loved it. Had 4 months off a year, was able to kind of be in the classroom as much as I possibly could. The department really, facilitated that. I wasn't having to do research because it wasn't a research institution. And, but the travel bug just became too much, It's like, I don't want to only have to be able to, why do I only get to travel during spring break or over the winter break? And then summer, I want to go when it's like a really sweet spot for wildlife, and I don't like sharing those experiences with people. So I want to go when it's low season, and so it didn't take very long to where I kind of started, building this business on the side that was never really intended on it being anywhere. I didn't expect it to go anywhere. But it was about the time of, 2000, I always forget when the economic, it would have been like 2008.
7, 8.
Yeah. The economy crashed. We started really hearing in the travel industry terms like ecotourism had been there. But every year I feel like in the travel industry you get a new buzzword. So sustainable tourism was starting to come on and all of these different things. And because of my background in wildlife and doing field work and stuff, I had the terminology. And I had the baseline knowledge. And so I'd be in conversations with other organizations, especially thinking about conservation partners. And there are other companies out there that were already doing this, but we started getting traction really quickly because a lot of companies were retrofitting it. They were kind of coming back and saying, oh, now we need to think about sustainability, or now we need to start thinking about conservation if they were focusing on wildlife. And we were already doing it. It was already in our DNA. And so we just got really good traction pretty quickly. And so it took a couple of years of me working nights after, grading and getting up early and doing it before I went into the college. But I decided I'm not a great employee in the sense that I really like to manage my own time. I like to I'm a control freak. And so I wasn't able to do that as much as I could. After being at the college for a decade, they wanted you, you started to get a pull, you need to be on more committees and stuff. I just wanted to be in the classroom, and that was it for me. And so it was just a good time for me to leave. And so I left, and friends thought I was crazy. I was tenured, I had a great job. I had 4 months off a year, but I took a leap, and luckily I had a super supportive partner that said, do it. And so in 2011, I didn't renew my contract and started running Reefs to Rockies full time. So yeah, and so, you build it slowly, and I've never been money driven. I've been experience driven. For me, it's about, I gave a speech at graduation one year at the college. I was faculty of the year one year, and I, talked about that mammalogy professor and his enthusiasm, and really the kind of the end of the talk was, it's a cliche, but it really is true. Find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And that really, it's very true. You're lucky if you can find something that you can make money at and enjoy it. And that's not to say some of it doesn't suck, right? I don't like checking email. Nobody likes check.
Send me your passport.
I don't. And there are all sorts of things about it that don't. But you still the underlying premise of it is your passion, and it's fantastic. It's been this last year, had we been having this conversation a year ago today, it would have been a very different conversation. But now that we're a year past COVID, or a year into it, not past it yet, but into it, it really allowed me as an entrepreneur and as a business owner to reset and kind of refigure out, okay, what is it really that you're most passionate about? And so it is the travel part, and it's very specific niche market travel with a heavy emphasis on wildlife viewing and really the spectacles. Not, there are companies and not to, this is not, I hope it doesn't sound like a negative at all, but there are companies that run, let's say it's a whale shark tour in Mexico, that the whale shark season's June, early June, kind of late May, early June through August. There are companies that will run whale shark trips that whole season. Well, that's not the sweet spot. The sweet spot's about a 10-day period. We're going to book only that 10-day sweet spot because we want it to be at a different level. And having that wildlife background and being kind of a nature nerd, wildlife junkie, I would rather do fewer trips, but make sure that when we get our clients into those spectacles, they are just at peak. It really is not this 2-month, 3-month window. It's very compressed. And so that's been, that's kind of where the company has been. And so that's kind of like a big dump, a word dump in terms of getting from a kid in Texas to Colorado and staying here. But yeah, so.
Yeah, let's go back a little bit, because I think that it's so amazing that you took that big leap into entrepreneurship. And I think in this industry in general, there is kind of this narrative that the only way you can do it is if you have a job. So could you tell me more about your mindset? Was it scary? What was the final decision-making factor that was like, okay, I'm going to leave my stable career that's in doing what I love to go on this path that isn't guaranteed in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I think, I can be a storyteller and make it, part of me it was scary. I remember, I vividly remember when I made the decision, there were a couple of things that came to be. One, I remember being there were a couple of factors. I really wanted to travel more. That was the big thing. I was into the study abroad program, and I wanted to do more of the travel part of it. And I was already kind of trying to figure out, how can I maybe get out of the semester for a week? Well, we all, as teachers, you don't. It's not like you can, it just doesn't exist, And I'd be like, what if I leave finals a little bit early? That sort of a thing, which isn't great to be asking for those things. But a couple of things had happened is the last 2 years I was at the college, a dear friend of mine who was a colleague, he's the other biologist that he was the only biologist on staff when I got hired. He got pancreatic cancer in his mid-40s.
That's so young.
Yeah. And he died a couple of years later, and seeing that and having worked with him at that point for 7-8 years and sitting in the office on our breaks and hearing him tell stories about what he was going to do when he retired with his wife, and his kids were young, and watching it. Watching him die, and kind of coming through remission and stuff, and that all, it changed me. It was like you don't have that guarantee. So I think that becomes, if it's something in you. Again, not everybody. I have kids. I tell them, all the time we talk about the future. They're 8 and almost 10. They're young, but it's like, if you can just figure out something that really engages you for an extended period of time, that's what I hope. And I hope that you can make money at it. That doesn't mean, to me, a measure of success is not the big house and the car and stuff. It's if you can pay your bills and be okay, not living with me, at 18,
on your own.
Yeah, on your own. But if you can find something that really fulfills you, that's great. And I think that's where I'm not really answering your question in the sense of, you have to, if it's really something you believe in, not to say that it's going to happen, because I have a hard time too. I tend to be a little bit more of a realist. If you just work your ass off, it's going to happen. I call BS on that somewhat too.
Sometimes
it just doesn't happen. But if you kind of follow that path, it works out. It's, I was willing to, I didn't get hired as a biologist. I'm friends with Bill Given, who you had on a recent episode. He was able to take a business background and then move it into doing, as a consultant and work in the field. I did field work, but more as a mechanism to get me into grad school and then the research that I did in grad school. But I was willing to work for free.
Yeah.
I worked for free for 2 years, and I lived very, without very much money. And I didn't grow up with money, so I paid for my college. I had scholarships, but I paid for what was left over. And so if you're willing to do it, you have to be willing to do it, which means you have to be able to sacrifice a little bit.
Go through the suck.
Yeah, go through the suck. Exactly. Embrace the suck, right? As Brene Brown would say.
Yeah.
But it's true. And so if you're not willing to do that, then you're probably not really willing to do it. Yeah. And I'm going to sound old, right? I'm in my late 40s now, but I it's this idea of, even when we used to think about getting interns for Reefs to Rockies, was it paid? Well, I didn't make money the first job I had was working as a naturalist intern at an urban wildlife nature center in Fort Worth. I drove 45 minutes a day. I got paid $20 a week. Now, granted, gas was less expensive then, but I think maybe I was taking home $10 a week. I mean, I was living with, my mom. She let me live there so I could, live for free. But, that's a lot of work and commitment to do. And so I think you have to be willing to kind of go through it. And it is tough because once you're in the system, especially with government jobs, people will, it's hard to navigate that. I mean, I remember when we were when we would go through hiring processes at the college, if you were already there and we wanted you on the team, there was going to be a way to get you on the team, sort of a thing. I mean, we may hire other faculty, and we did. I mean, it wasn't always, but, if you're already kind of have your foot in the door, you're willing to work part-time as an adjunct professor and then go into that. But I think a lot of it is just being willing. I have a good friend who she looked for jobs in a superfluous way for 2.5 years and was told no a lot. But she really, I'd meet with her and she's like, this is what I want to do. And she made it work. She waited tables. She did whatever she had to do. And now she's got this great job and, she's living the dream in the sense that she's doing what she really felt like was her calling. So
let's go back then to Reefs to Rockies, like what it stands for, because obviously me and Bill are very close, and how I immediately knew I was going to completely love you is that you have a different level at which you travel and see nature. Like it's going to be very conservation focused, environmental stewardship, all those things. So let's chat more about that. How do you tie that all together to ensure that your trips are making the least amount of impact, and also just more about Reefs to Rockies in general?
Yeah. So, I think the big thing is, there's certainly impact, but let's talk about Costa Rica probably the most. Costa Rica, up until a year ago, was by far our number one selling destination for new clients. Now, I knew it. I know Costa Rica in a way that there aren't a lot of travel consultants know Costa Rica, because I started a study abroad program there, so I traveled with students. I work with one school that I still travel with them every year. I love that school, and so actually registration for the fall trip just opened today, and it looks like we're going to have enough interest for 2 back-to-back trips. But it's, it's kind of when we first started really kind of plugging Costa Rica, we had Amy, who was working with us at the time. We really, I don't know how familiar you are with Costa Rica, and with many destinations, Costa Rica has a certificate for sustainable tourism. But by traveling on initially with the students on kind of a lower budget scale, a lot of those companies have such small margins that what people don't tell you is it costs a lot of money, not only in time, but also money to get certified. It's not free. You can't just say, I'm doing these things, and so give me a certification based upon these green measures I'm doing, these sustainability measures I'm doing. I'm using non-toxic cleaning. I'm not spraying pesticides. That's not a free thing. But I was seeing, staying at properties and working with people that they were as green as it came. One of my favorite lodges in Costa Rica is a property called El Romanzo down in the Osa Peninsula. When we first started working with them, they weren't certified, because they ended up having to hire 2 interns to do it, to go through the certification process.
2 interns.
When they got their certification, they got the highest level of certification they could get. Well, that wasn't by accident. They had been doing it, they've been walking the walk for years. And so we really preferentially try to, you're not going to see accommodations highlighted in our itineraries because it's not about what it is to me. Yes, as I've gotten older, I love staying at luxury accommodations, you know. I'm not a super big fan of where I'm going to stay in September for these 2 weeks with students, especially at one property that's completely off the grid. There's no electricity. You know, I hope my little rechargeable battery fan works a little bit to get some air. You know, it's not comfortable. But making sure that if a client comes to us and says, all I care about are the accommodations, and I just had a client recently that said that's what the thing they keep hitting, they're probably not a good fit for us. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. Like, there are other travel companies out there that's their specialty. There's nothing to knock that. But for us, it's about the underlying focus is the wildlife experience. It's about that portion. And by focusing on that, we tend to get them in shoulder season or green season. You know, you Google what's the best time. Mm-hmm. You Google what's the best time to travel to Costa Rica. And if you look at companies that are running a lot of trips, they're running it from mid-December through March. You can't pay me to go to Costa Rica during that time. I mean, honestly, like if somebody offered me a trip during that time, I would say, let's do it in May. Let's do it in September, because if you're a wildlife enthusiast, you want to be there when the animals are active and when the rainforest looks like rainforest, when it's all lush and green. Well, that's in the rainy season, the green season. And so we kind of focus on all parts of it, making sure that we're working with as many in-country operators. When we first started, we booked everything direct. I booked before I even had staff, where every transfer was booked directly, every hotel was booked directly. It was very it's a lot. Now we don't. Now we have a partner there that we trust implicitly. But even them going back to that level of knowledge, I've had to train them sometimes. So they'll try, like, I'll tell them the profile of what the clients are looking for, especially from a wildlife perspective. So I kind of tell them, okay, I think they need to be here for this particular, if it's their birders or, whatever it is. And for a long time, like, well, I'm like, you need to develop a relationship here, because these properties we've used in the past, they're great. It doesn't make sense to go to Monteverde for cloud forest when they could go to this other cloud forest environment where there's far less infrastructure. And the wildlife viewing's better. So it's that. It's just that whole approach of not needing to be big, not needing to be mass market, understanding that it's about the experience aspect of it. It's about supporting those local communities. I mean, even like we were just talking, I leave for back-to-back trips to California on Wednesday. I've already started looking at some of these clients one particular client has done this trip before, so I want to make sure she gets as many new experiences in it as she can. So I'm finding different restaurants. We always embed craft beer. We'll probably at some point talk about bourbon.
Oh, we're going to talk about that.
And those sorts of things. But, how can I really get them into the sense of place too? I mean, Costa Rica, you can stay at some incredible high-end luxury lodges that feel like Costa Rica. You can also stay at really high-end properties that just feel like any other 5-star resort. And you're, that
be in Mexico or something.
Yeah, right? and it doesn't resonate. I want to know that I'm where I'm in a sense of place. That's not just the comfort aspect, but all of it. That I'm engaging with the employees, and there isn't this standoff portion. And
yes.
Yeah. So
that's, wow. I kind of wish I worked for your company. Sounds incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, we're not trying to be something for everybody. But when we do it, when we get that client, when I interview the client, I'm just like, please let me do this trip for you. You have no idea how we can just knock this out of the park. Oh, your granddaughter's interested in the sea turtles? How about this? How about we send you to this sea turtle conservation project where for 2 days, she's going to get to work with sea turtles during the day. There's only a handful of these projects in the world. It's daytime sea turtle stuff. She's going to have her hands on these critically endangered species. And then for the rest of the trip, you can stay at these really cool eco lodges where monkeys are going to be outside. you talk about blowing the socks off your kids' experience, and that's possible. I mean, that, and the fact that we customize everything is, I think, also a little bit different. We don't run set departures, which in hindsight, sure, that would have been a way to scale up. But then you can't tell me that you really customize trips. If your whole portfolio is scheduled group departures, how custom are you? Because that's what that's what you've been selling, and that's great. There's, like I said, any of these comments aren't meant to be knocking anything other than the fact that for us, it's really small scale, very heavy on that wildlife experience, and making sure, because we're not big. It's not like Bill, where he's now, got camps and all these other things that are great, where he can really put you in that space, but making sure that we get you in the sweet spot, but also using these really fantastic local properties and get you into the local restaurant so that you're out in the community eating and you get as much trickle-down effect as you can with respect to how that money is staying in the community. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I value that so much. Like just coming back from Nepal a couple days ago, still fighting jet lag. I mean, that's the way I traveled the entire time.
Yeah.
Like my tour guide, I guess you can call him, Raj, he was with us. Like, he lives in Kathmandu, and he took us around, and all of Dave Johnson's partners that we met with, like, they're the conservationists on the ground. The owner of the lodges were with us when we were out on safari. It was, we felt like family.
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm completely in love with Nepal.
Yeah.
Like, if I would have done a different style trip, I don't know if I would have had that type of connection.
Yeah.
Because it's also the people. Like, we go to these places for the wildlife experiences, but it's always the people that we remember.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I want to go back and feel like family with them again. And then you add each other on Facebook, because everybody around the world seems to have Facebook.
And I mean, and you develop these relationships. There's another sea turtle project in Costa Rica that we worked with for years, and we haven't been sending travelers there, not because it's not a fantastic project, but because of there's a point at which the accommodations, if there can be some small tweaks that really accelerate comfort, and when you're not getting that, but that project's getting hammered right now because of COVID, all of them are.
Yes.
And to see, and so seeing those requests through Facebook and stuff, it's like, it hurts to see that. It's one of the things in the news, and we're hearing about, positivity rates and how many people are in the hospital. What we're not talking about is how many people have lost their jobs and haven't worked for a year. You're talking about, what is it? 1 in 5 people? Is it 10% or 20% of the workforce in the world depends on tourism?
In the world.
And nobody's talking about that.
No.
And here we have PPP loans, and we have unemployment and extended benefits through that. Well, what if you live in Tanzania?
Nepal.
What if you live in Costa Rica? When I went to Costa Rica in November, which was still major during the shutdown, the driver that picked me up I took my sister. I had a trip that was postponed, but I decided to go because I had the week blocked. So I took my sister, who had never been. When she arrived before me, the driver picked her up, took her to the airport. We were going to get a rental car, took her to this airport hotel to wait for me, picked me up. So I was talking to him. I said, how busy have you been since March? He said, you're the third person I've driven since March. It was November, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, and we can all talk about, but that, you think about, especially when I don't know, it's amazing. I wish it was something that was getting more. Of course, I'm invested in it because I'm in the travel industry. And I've had friends say, well, aren't you kind of, how do you wrap your head around wanting to promote travel when it's a risk? I'm like, there are people starving to death, in terms of what's going on. And yes, it's a risk, but I think at this point, how many of us know people that have gotten it and been okay?
Okay.
Yeah, the bad stories are always going to be there. Of course, we want to minimize risk. It's been really tough, especially, as you said, you know these people. They're like family. You see them suffering, and it's coming back. And I hope in a way it doesn't, I mentioned earlier buzzwords, the buzzword before COVID, I gave a talk at Metro State University to their ecotourism class. I gave it that talk once a year. Every year I would use the buzzword for the year, like what was trending. It was over-tourism.
Mm-hmm.
2 months before we first heard what COVID was, 3 months later is a worldwide shutdown. Well, I'm hoping maybe this does a little bit of a reset, where, okay, But I don't know. I talked to somebody today about availability in Alaska. They're sold. Some of those lodges are 100% capacity already. So I don't know. We'll see. But I hope maybe we look at it a little bit different way with respect to how we approach it and scale. And
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think in America we live in this bubble where it's like we have to mitigate risk, we have to mitigate risk. Well, how many stimulus checks have been sent out? How much unemployment is there? When I was just in Nepal, none of that existed. And since I was with partners who are all in the tourism industry, they haven't had work for a year. And there is no government assistance there.
Yeah.
And when I was in Kathmandu, they were very open about the unstable political situation. And I think a lot of it has to do with this, because they're still getting taxed out the wazoo and they have absolutely no income. So what was even worse, the most real conservation experience I've ever had in my life. Since people have no income, they are more reliant on the natural resources that are around them. And multiple people were killed while I was there, because they were going into the forest to get things just to heat their house, just to get firewood, just to do things just to survive, and which is putting them in danger with the natural wildlife that was in the area. So there was multiple tiger attacks. One of them, actually, ironically, I had seen 2 days prior in the same spot. Yes, the same tiger. Someone had gone in the area. He was collecting grass for his elephant. So he was off his elephant in the area collecting grass, happened to be near where the tiger was, and the tiger was threatened and he attacked him. And would have any of these scenarios happened had, tourism been up, had there been a sense of income, how there been something else?
Yeah, no, it's tough. It's hard to wrap your head around. And that's the thing. We, especially if you have any sort of buy-in on, conservation-based tourism, sustainable tourism, community-based, whatever you want to call it, where you're trying to make sure that as much money is going into the local community, because, the basic needs are the same. You have to eat. And, you hear this story, in Tanzania, well, who are some of the best guides? Well, the poachers. And the fact is if they can make more money guiding instead of poaching, they'll take that guide job probably, but if there's not that money coming in, they still have to eat. And so they're going to go back to poaching. And you can't fault them for it.
No, what else do they have?
It's a very different, we have a very different way of, and I'm glad I live here, but it's frustrating when I hear things about, oh, well, why are we talking about travel? It's like, because people depend upon it. You think about all of these economies that haven't,
It's the only thing their only
just
quote unquote export.
Yeah. I thought it was a big deal to lose, have a 125% drop in revenue in a 3-week span last year. But I still had, I had a savings and I had a PPP loan and these things that can kind of get you through it. You have that rug pulled out from underneath you and you have no backup plan and no forewarning. That's the big thing, right? Is the fact that it just happened so quickly. But, I think the thing is that at least as we're starting to move past it and we're starting to get some travel and, people, a lot of the postponements are now coming up and they're happening because, a core demographic of our clients are fully vaccinated. And so they're ready to, at least domestically, start getting back out there. So those domestic trips are running. But for me, it's about, let's get some money into those local economies. That small little hotel owner, that restaurant, that brewery where, it's their passion project, and me bringing, 10 people in and us all sitting there and having a couple of beers is going to help that, daily bottom line. And so, but, the thing is that the reality at the end of the day, I have, let's say all of this Reefs to Rockies ended tomorrow. I have had the most amazing, we just had our 15th anniversary in February. We celebrated our 15th anniversary. The most incredible wildlife experiences. I have been in the right place at the right time on lots of different occasions, and that, and clients with me, so which is the other great thing about that is, having that have become friends and those takeaways of, wow, and knowing that you, not only did you get to experience that, but that local economy also benefited from you being there. eating at the local restaurants, et cetera. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. And I just think that those of us that are more in touch on a global scale just sees what this shutdown has done on a stronger level. So yeah, hopefully here soon things will start to open back up.
Yeah. I think, I think people are, we're starting to think about it, and then hopefully you get that ability for the people that depended upon it to, I mean, we're, the guides and stuff, it'll be interesting, to see, depending upon, how it goes. I mean, if you're a guide, whether or not those guides are passionate enough to maybe have taken another part-time job and then come back to it, right? We were talking about, how driven are you to do that particular thing, and whether or not they're going to be able to do that in the future, or did they go take an office job or, anything,
Right.
working in a computer lab or whatever, in terms of trying to make those ends meet.
More stable, boring job.
Well, no, I mean, and I wish I loved sitting at a computer all day.
It would be convenient.
I know people that do, so it's not, I think that's great.
I mean, because they're needed. Yeah.
for
That's the thing
sure.
with our personality types. It's just like, I can't do that either.
Not my jam, but, for sure for other people, so.
Yeah. So that was great. Really want. So ironically, Costa Rica keeps getting brought up in my life over and over and over and over and over. And I really want to go this year for my 30th birthday. So
Yeah,
I have to chat.
We can chat. I can at least point you in the right direction.
Great. So let's go back to birding. So why are we sitting where we are right now?
Yeah, so this is Walden Ponds Wildlife Habitat. Funnily, is funnily a word? Funny enough.
I like it. Let's keep it.
This is the first place I remember going birding when I moved to Boulder in 96. So I moved in 96, so it had to be probably late 96. So we're at this little spot that every time I come here, and I don't know how many times I've come here, you see something new. We're kind of in a transition period right now, but this old property that they took, used to use and quarry out materials for roads and streets, has now been filled with water. And it's just, if you can, within a 2-mile loop that, heading west towards the foothills from here, you can see bald eagles and osprey fishing and great horned owls and pretty much every type of waterfowl you can imagine that we get during Colorado throughout the year. American white pelicans have just gotten back. If we walked, so we're sitting, not how many yards from where we parked? 30, 40 yards?
Yeah, not that far.
In the summer, from the beginning of the boardwalk to the end of this boardwalk, it is not unusual to see 30 species of birds.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Just in that space. I mean, it will be popping. It's a little warm today, too. I think that maybe why we're in this lull. But red-winged blackbirds, common yellowthroats, song sparrows, house wrens, American goldfinches, all of this. And so, as I've kind of moved through grad school where I had to do birding for work, I took several years of not really birding for pleasure. But after that, and I grew up birding in Texas, I started birding in Texas, which is kind of not the best place to start birding because it's really, really good. And I remember thinking, Colorado doesn't really have that many great birds. Well, we may only have just over 500 species that have been recorded here, but they are great birds. Mm-hmm. And so when I left teaching in 2011, I was working from home, and I went from this job to where I talked on any given day for about 6 hours straight. Our lectures were 3-hour lectures.
Wow,
so
that's
you
a
took
long
breaks.
class.
So if you had two teaching days, 2 classes and a teaching day, you were talking for 6 hours. And then, and then you had all these colleagues. So the collegiality aspect of it was, you were talking during your off time as well. So going from that to working alone in my office at home, I really missed people. Mm. And I'm not super extroverted, but I had about that time, 2012-ish, it's kind of a little bit blurry. I was starting to get back into birding, and I got this idea. I was at a friend of mine who, at the time, she's a writer here in Boulder, Michelle Thiel. She was running these conferences. She used to run Women's Adventure magazine. She was running these creative conferences. and they would have a writing track and a photography track. And I went to several of them, but it's one of those things, it's kind of like this intense weekend where it just sparks all this creativity. And I had really started getting into bird watching here. But what I was seeing was like the books about birding, et cetera, were really not focused on what to me was so beautiful about being in nature, the aesthetics of it. And so at one of these conferences, I came up with an idea of a book that would highlight the aesthetics or the beauty of birding in Colorado. And what really kind of tying in, because I went to grad school and planned to study birds, but I found out really quickly that you can't study birds without learning a lot about the plants, because that dictates everything. So I had to learn the plants in Colorado. And I fell in love with our different ecotones or ecosystems, habitats, our life zones, whatever you want to use. And so I pitched a book at one of these conferences that I felt like was probably going to have a mostly female target market. I'd been out with a lot of birders where it was just like list. I want to see, if I don't see 50 species today, it wasn't a great day. For me, it was kind of the slow birding aspect. I want to be in a pretty space. And yeah, if it's a new bird up at a dump in Fort Collins, I may drive up there to see gyrfalcon. And I did drive up there to see gyrfalcon, but I was still looking at a dump, Yeah. It wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing experience. But so pitched this book, the publisher really liked the idea, but then, as any publisher would say, is who is going to be your target market? You can't just say it's women, whatever. And so I didn't know how to reach. I also felt like it was going to be beginning birders that were really going to be, that would kind of get into this particular aspect. So I was on a trip. We actually do trips for Denver. We're one of the travel partners for Denver Audubon. And it was the first or second trip we did for them was a trip out to Cape May, New Jersey. And I was sharing a room with a woman on the trip. And we flew in and out of Philadelphia. And she was planning on staying a few days later. I said, what are you going to do? She's like, well, I'm just going to go on Meetup. And I had never heard of Meetup at the time. So I said, well, what is that? She's like, oh, it's this great thing. You can put in your interests and you'll find Meetup groups that, have similar interests. And so I'm just going to do that. I'll find things to do based on that. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. And I was at another kind of workshop and I'm here, I'm kind of thinking how, what can I do to get non-birders? Because I could go lead bird walks for Denver Audubon, but if you're familiar with what the Audubon Society is, you already kind of have a knowledge of birds. You've already kind of sought that out. You've looked for it. How am I going to get non-birders? And Denver Audubon was doing birds and beers trivia. And I was kind of researching stuff, and there was a woman up in the Minneapolis area that was doing birds and beers events. I think she was calling it Birds and Beers. But and you look into it, and it was at a brewery. It was like a talk, okay, people come in and talk about birds. At that time, I couldn't find anybody that was actually getting people out birding.
They were just having beers.
Yeah, they were talking about beer, whatever. It was related to birds, but it wasn't this part of it. So the Meetup stuff, the book, how am I going to get this? Hey, you know what? I ran into a former student of mine. I was teaching a class for the Denver Botanic Gardens. And another woman that was on this trip, and we immediately kind of clicked. We're still really good friends. She was the editor on the book that I wrote last year. But I was talking to her, I was like, I'm thinking about doing this thing via Meetup. This was in 2012. Via Meetup called Birding and Beers, where we go bird watching and we go have a beer afterwards. You think anybody would be interested in that? Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Okay, well, I'm going to do that then. So I start this Meetup group. First one was May of 2012, so in a month, it'd be 9 years. We go to City Park. I was living in Park Hill at the time. City Park, and then to Vine Street Pub and Grill. I don't know if you're familiar. Mountain Sun is up here in Boulder, so that was their Denver thing. It filled. The first one was full. I thought maybe I'd get 2 or 3 people.
Maybe. Let alone full.
Well, now we have over 1,100 members. I did a Zoom last night with them because right now normally on a regular meetup, we would have 25 to 30 people out, which is a lot of people, but it's social and people are spreading out. So let's say we come here, I have a couple, we're we're not, and I was specific to pick locations that were high use so that even with beginning birders, you didn't have to worry about, and the breweries typically don't open until noon. So we're kind of not doing it. We're doing it 10 o'clock in the morning start time, or in the evening if it was, when we had light later in the day. But it just took off. And all of a sudden I had people literally, I remember a woman vividly, she showed up, she's like, I've never looked through a pair of binoculars. I don't have a pair of binoculars. I hope you guys can walk me through this, but I think I might want to be a birder. And so and all of a sudden I was like, this is the target market. This is how you put beer in the title in Colorado and you're going to get the people, And so it took off. I still think it was one of my greatest ideas because one, now I get to go drink beer with this great community after birding. I can't think of two more fun things to do together. And it's just it became so incredibly popular. And because I own a travel company, the conversation would come to, what do you do? So now I have this whole portfolio of birding and beers trips too, where, like, for instance, the California trip, we will be at a brewery every single day during that. I won't be imbibing during the day, but the guests will. And so that's a thing. And so it keeps me out. It keeps me out birding. And last year, because of COVID, gave me a little bit of free time. That book that I pitched, a decade ago, I was finally able to finish.
Oh,
so
that's amazing. What's it called?
It's called Best Birding Hikes, and it's the Colorado Front Range. So it's 25 hikes. I say it's 25 hikes that will make you a better birder. It will make you a better birder. It made me a better birder writing it, but it really does. It focuses on beautiful trails, setting people up for success, focusing on the common, because I get asked all the time, how do I become a better birder? Well, it's practice, right? And it's not focusing on 50 species on a walk. It's focusing on, okay, we've seen a lot of American robins. Well, let's focus on, how do we tell the difference between a male and a female robin? Oh, and yeah, you may say it's just a robin, but did you know robins almost went extinct during DDT days? Like the bald eagle and the peregrine falcon, they get a lot more press. When Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, one of those birds that wasn't singing in the spring was the American robin.
That's mind-blowing to think.
Yeah, and so it's so ubiquitous now that you wouldn't think that. And here, I'm surprised we haven't seen a bald eagle fly over because of that nest. But those sorts of things. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it was fun to be able to have Jen, who was, I actually was one of the first people I kind of talked about birding and beers with. Now she works at the Denver Botanic Gardens, and she's does a lot of technical writing. But she was able to edit the book. And it was a love project. I wanted to get it done last year, so we published it as an ebook. And so I had another really good friend of mine do all the design. So another guy that we work with on website stuff did the website for it. And so it was just a real kind of this great opportunity to get something accomplished that I had been wanting to do for so long, and to work with people I really liked. That was a great thing too. Everybody I worked with was fantastic. So so that's kind of where we are now and why we're here. It's one of my favorite spots.
It's beautiful. I'm so glad you said we should meet here. I'm like, down, totally down.
So we have, I think it's a red-tailed hawk probably there flying over right now. Yeah, I think it's come through a couple of times now. But it's a fantastic spot. And
there it goes.
Yeah, so that's me.
So where is your bird? Where can anyone find that book?
Yeah, so it's on, the website is Best Birding, and it's birding, not bird watching, BIRDING, hikes.com. And it's an ebook that you just download. And it's trails all the way along the Front Range from the northernmost trail. So there are 5 trails up in the Fort Collins area. So Soapstone Prairie, which is up close to the Wyoming border, down as far south as Aiken Canyon, which is south of Colorado Springs. And they're just gorgeous hikes. So it's, travel, birds, beers, 3 of my favorite things. And, come on. So living the dream.
Yeah.
Last year it was not exactly an enjoyable dream, but, I'm still doing it. And so, the one thing about last year is it certainly gave an opportunity to reset and reprioritize and figure out, are you really in it for the right reasons, or, is it making you happy? And it is. And so that's, I can't imagine doing anything else. So.
Wow. And it's amazing that you had that chance to reflect on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, forced reflection. But
Forced-
reflection.
But hey, that's okay, right? I mean, as a species, we don't tend to, those things that are difficult, we don't seek them out necessarily as often as we should. So
Exactly.
we have, think, two bald eagles coming in right behind each other. So let's just watch these. If they're not bald eagles, nope, they're not. But you see the white, you know what they are? They're pelicans.
Oh,
I just saw the white head, and then,
Oh, you see the background
yeah,
now.
you can see the pelicans. So they've just gotten back in the last week or two as well.
Oh, that's amazing. I used to live really close to Arsenal,
Yeah.
and just watching them fish together, like the little group things. I don't know what you call those.
I don't know either, but
They're fun.
and I had never watched that, how synchronized it is.
It's amazing.
That's one of the things. So that's the other thing that came out of COVID is last year, and this was before I really even decided I was going to get the book done. It was like March 16th, I think. I just internally said, because we were on lockdown, but they, it was, there's plenty of birding. I'm at 10 minutes from here, and there's even other places that are really good, even closer. I said, I'm going to go birding every day until COVID is over. And I thought it would be, I really thought it would be 2 weeks, because I think that's initially what we were thinking. It'll be a couple of weeks, because by Easter, right, it was going to be all wrapped up. So I was going to keep a checklist every day until COVID was over. I missed April 20th, and I missed a day in June. But tomorrow will be 300 straight days of birding and keeping a checklist. That would have never happened.
Wow.
And now it's a priority. Now that's something that makes my schedule every day, which is also great. And it's afforded me the opportunity to see things I didn't think I could possibly see close to home,
Just because you were making, like you said, you're making it a priority.
Yeah, exactly. Putting it on the schedule. So that was the other really great thing about it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I need an excuse like that. I need to find something like that.
But it's true, right? You have to schedule it out. Whether, I was talking to another friend today, whether it's working out or, I mean, there are certain things you're going to do, but I don't know that many of us could say something different that's not in your typical daily routine that you're going to do every single day for a period of time. And I don't know when I'll stop. I'm going to try to make it to the end of the year so that I get the full of every day. And there are days where it's a little more challenging. It may be a 5-minute checklist or a 10-minute checklist. I had a COVID test today because I'm traveling next week. I did a checklist while I was waiting for my COVID test in a high school parking lot. So I saw crows building a nest. I'm like, this counts. So I'll just document this right now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Awesome. So I think next, I kind of brought up some things, but one thing I really love to ask everyone on here is, what do you think has been one of the biggest struggles that you've had to go through in your career or your life in general?
I think this last year has been, it's been a really tough year. In the sense of there have been some fantastic things about it, and now I can look at it in the rearview mirror. When I was in it, like April, May, and then we kind of started thinking we were coming out of it, and then it was like, okay, this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen. Everything keeps getting pushed off. I had a tremendous sense of what is it going to be like, because through birding and beers, and I mentioned travel, I've got this huge local community that are a lot of our core travelers that I know personally. I mean, they're friends, right? And what happens if my business fails? The thought of that, and that being a failure, like, how do I exist in this community? I'm so in this not the bigger, but this community of mine, that what happens if I can't figure out a way to make this work, to where a year from now, because we don't know, right, what it's going to look like, as we're in the midst of it. What if I have to shut the doors and just maybe, not be able to run those trips that we've postponed or whatever? And so that, getting through that, on top of the other things where my partner lost her job in May, and then we have 2 young boys that all of a sudden have to be homeschooled, and you're sitting here going, how is this all coming to a head all at once? I'm losing my business. It's out of control. I have no control over it. I tell the story. It would have been a lot better if I had just fucked up, excuse my language.
Oh, you can do whatever
you know
you
what
want.
I mean? And that was it. That it was a big mess up and
Something that was at least in your control.
yeah, that was in my control. But this is the you know, the floor's been pulled out from underneath you. And now on top of that, you have these two young boys that just found out they're not going to go back to school for the year. Oh, and 2 months later, you get a call, I go camping. I needed to get away. And so I was trying to kind of process, and my partner said, why don't you just go camping for a couple of days? So I went up to this state wildlife area in northeastern Colorado, and I was going to be there for, I think it was going to be there 3 nights. And this was the second night. And I get a call, and, you know, she says, I just lost my job. And I'm sitting there going, oh, what are we going to do? You know, it's like, you don't know at this point. You know, you've got PPP that's going to last you for 5 months, but now your other income. And so trying to figure out all of that and you know, trying to figure out, well, is this the opportunity? Because, you know, I'm an advocate for if you can find it in yourself, if you have any wherewithal to be an entrepreneur or a business owner, there's so much reward in that. And I had always said, you know, maybe you should be doing your own. You know, you really have a specific client that you want to work with. You have a specific way you want to do it. You're really in it for your clients, which again, you're not going to be able to do if you work for a large firm. It's just not going to happen. Maybe this is the opportunity. And that's essentially what has happened. Like now her business is, you know, up and running and all these things. But this last year was interesting. I tell my boys, I was like, you saw me cry more last year than ever. You know, and they're just looking at you like, what is going on? It's like, you know, oh, another cancellation, or, you know, oh, you know, this. And it's just like, man, just when you think you're getting it back. So that's a lot of it. But the other thing is you're not alone. You know, I mean, I've been able to go out with colleagues and talk about the suck. You know, we said it earlier. I mean, with our boys, embrace the suck. Like, this sucks. There's no other way around it. It sucks. I mean, we had a lot of family time and stuff too, which came out of it, but it still didn't take away the other stuff. And so that was a challenge, and making sure, you know, giving myself a deadline for the book and getting that done and trying to figure out what that was going to look like, and making sure that I kept the community of birding and beers going too, because we weren't able to get together. And so doing Zooms where, okay, how can we make this creative where it's not just 15 people online? And a couple of members had kind of come up with these ideas that were, why don't you give us something to do? And then we'll all come back and talk about it. So, you know, I mentioned City Park was the first place we ever had a birding and beers. So we always do an anniversary walk at City Park. Well, last year, May, we couldn't do it. So it was go to City Park on your own between now and when we get online, and come back and share what you found. And go get a beer at a local brewery within 10 miles. And support a local brewery. And we're going to talk about, you know, so now we do it. We've done several of them. We had one last night, which was, it's spring. What are the birds telling you? You know, it's like, everybody, what have you noticed differently? And it's like, where did you go? What did you see? What are you drinking? Last night was a lot of wine. Last night was wines and wings, somebody said.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
It wasn't. We've done whiskey and wings before.
I need to be a part of this group.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's all of it. And you know, with anything else, we've all heard it. With grief, with loss, time is a healer. You will get better with time. You don't see it when you're in it, and it certainly doesn't feel like it, and you don't know how long it's going to be, but there will be a point where it's not going to hurt as much, and it's not going to maybe be as scary, all of that. And now it's just, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm thankful for it, but it's certainly allowed me a perspective that I wouldn't have today without it. So yeah, it's been a real challenge, but also now I can appreciate that challenge. You know, it's, I'm sure the same challenge as somebody trains for a marathon or anything else, but you know, there was a lot. It definitely felt like a period of loss where you thought what you thought was going to happen just disappeared. But it's slowly coming back, and it's coming back in a different way. And I like the way it's coming back in that different way. So it's good.
Then what would you think, in your opinion? I mean, you've said so many amazing things that you've done, but what are you most proud of?
You know, I think I'm most proud of the community. I do think birding and beers, I love Reefs to Rockies, but I think the community that I've helped foster, because it's the other members too, that I'm super proud of, because it's such a diverse group of people in the sense of where they're at in their lives, whether they live alone, whether they're married, whether they're younger. Everybody has to be 21 if they're, they don't have to be. We have people that bring kids, but most people are.
They're like the members.
Yeah, but it's a sense of connection. It's an opportunity. It's a safe space, and it's based in nature, which I think for a lot of people, it can be spiritual. It's a healer, just being outdoors. And so making that opportunity available on a regular basis and still having people show up every time I announce an event, it means a lot. I really do think I'm really proud of. And, it has an educational component. It has a supporting local business component. It has all these other facets. But most importantly, I've had, especially when we first started getting back together last year, I guess it probably would have been late summer, fall, where we would stay after and like even here, bring a chair and bring a beverage, if we could, because we couldn't go to a brewery, and sit outside. And how many times I had somebody look at me and go, "This is the first time I've been around other people in months. Do you know how much I needed this? I live alone. I'm working from home. This feels so good." And so that I'm super proud of and super happy to have gotten that idea. And then of course it's now a lot of the members that really keep it going. But today that I'm real proud of that. So
it's beautiful. So I guess I'd love to ask this one last question. You have so much wonderful experience. So to anyone listening, what is like the biggest piece of advice that either you've been told or that you love to give that you would like to share?
Trust your gut.
Yes.
There is something about it, right? We tend to, I'm a huge fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I think, his books kind of blur together, but I think it's Blink, where he talks about we make assessments, and it's not always right. But if you feel like driven to something, if you feel like this is really where you want to be or where you want to go, trust in it, and be willing to work your ass off for it, but also be willing to understand that maybe it's not the right thing for you, and maybe you thought it was, and it's okay to not to be what you thought it was going to be. So just kind of, if inside it doesn't feel good, trust that. If it feels good, even little bits of it, then, stick with it.
Trust that too.
Trust that too. Yeah. I think that's huge. There's just something to be said for that ability to kind of just, it's probably, you feel that way for a reason. And so I don't know that we always do that, and allowing yourself the opportunity to be in tune with that, to be not so into whatever it is, to kind of give yourself the opportunity to get out of your headspace a little bit and let those things happen.
Yeah. Awesome. If anybody wants to get connected with you or Reefs to Rockies, what's the best way?
Yeah, so the website, the company is Reefs to Rockies, which you always have to spell it. It's Reefs as in coral reefs, and it is with an S because it gets dropped a lot. So it's REEF as in Frank, S as in Sam, to Rockies. And then my email, and this is, now that I've had to spell that, it's Sheridan at reefstorokies.com. So you can only imagine how many times people have not gotten me emails because my name is difficult. But you can just go to Reefs to Rockies and send me something through contact. Birding and Beers is a meetup group, so that's open to everybody. We actually had somebody join us last night from Phoenix.
Really?
Yeah, she was a first-timer, and her friend had just joined the group. He was also a first-timer. She's from here originally. And it was great. She's like, yeah, it gave me something to do tonight. Talk about, she had gone birding in Phoenix, and so she was talking about that. So that's Birding and Beers, and Birdwatch. It's short, birding. I'm a birder. I'm not, bird watching is just, we kind of joke about the difference. If you're just looking, birding is, taking it kind of all in. And then the book is bestbirdinghikes.com. So, yeah.
Well, awesome.
Well, should we go get a beer?
Let's go get a beer right now.
Let's go get a beer. All right.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode of Rewildology. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button to never miss a future episode. Do you have a cool environmental organization, travel story, or research that you'd like to share? Let me know at rewildology.com. Until next time, friends, together we will rewild the planet.